The Wood Whisperer is sponsored by Woodcraft. Just get started. Welcome, my friends, to another Ask TWW, where you guys ask the questions and I do my best to answer them. Today's topics are blade alignment on the table saw, tools for laying out your shop, router table suggestions, how to cut thin strips, choosing plugs and receptacles, and the best way to spread glue. So let's dive in. David L. C4W, which sounds like it might be C3PO's cousin. He asks, when I push wood through my Harvey table saw, I consistently hear and feel the rear half of the blade scraping the wood as I feed it through. Is this normal? Ideally, no, you shouldn't be able to hear the wood scraping the back of the teeth, but that's what you get for buying a Harvey. That's a joke. Everybody, calm down. It's gonna be okay. In a perfect world, the front of the blade makes the cut and the material passes through the back of the blade cleanly. But unfortunately, we don't usually live in a perfect world. Blades are sometimes out of flat. You can have something called runout, where the blade wobbles just enough to cause issues. And of course, your fence could simply be out of parallel with the blade. Now, this is actually a serious concern at the table saw because it's not just a cut quality issue. You could lead to burning the wood, you can overheat your blade and cause premature dulling, and you increase your risk of kickback if you're making contact with the back of the blade. And this is one of the reasons why I recommend people just over time pay attention to the way your tools sound and also the way they feel. Because if something changes and you detect, that doesn't sound right, a lot of times you could circumvent a problem and fix it before it happens. So the first thing that I would recommend for David is that he do a bit of a calibration on his table saw fence. And I usually recommend that you start with trying to make the fence perfectly parallel to the blade. Now you can do this with a fancy dial indicator like this one, or you can just use a piece of scrap. I like to use a small piece of dowel stock. I set the fence so that the blade is just rubbing the dowel when I move it up and down. I could just barely hear and feel it grazing the surface. I then take that same tooth, rotate it to the back, and check again with the dowel. If I have the same sound and feel when the blade makes contact, it's parallel. If not, I can make slight adjustments to the fence and test again. Now, once you're pretty confident that you have them aligned, make a test cut. Can you hear or feel contact with the back of the blade? Is there any burning? Is the cut nice and clean? Now, if everything looks good, you're pretty much done at this point. But remember, we do live in this imperfect world and our tools aren't perfect. So even in a state of a parallel setup, you may still have some contact at the back and the cut quality can suffer. So that's when we employ something called towing out. With the tow out method, I initially set up the fence so it's parallel to the blade. But then I knock it out at the back, away from the back of the blade by somewhere between 1 and 3 thousandths. This will make no difference in the straightness of our cut, but it acts like a bit of an insurance policy as it ensures that the material doesn't really come in contact with the teeth at the back. So my specific advice to you, David, is to make sure that you do a full calibration of the saw. You want to make sure that your blade is parallel with your miter slots and that your fence is parallel with both the miter slots and the blade. You might even check for run out, but just be careful not to get caught in the calibration rabbit hole that some of us can get caught in, because ultimately it's the test cuts that reveal what's actually happening and if it's something we need to chase down. Next up, we have Greg. He says, I'm building a new shop on my property. I've worked out the plans for the building, and now I have to determine the shop layout. I'm fairly adept at SketchUp, but I'm wondering if that's the best tool to develop a shop layout. Now, while I can't say that SketchUp is the best option, it's the one that I actually do use. Here's an old layout that I did for my Arizona shop years ago, and it really served me well. Now, while it does seem to me that SketchUp is really trying their hardest to edge out the hobbyist woodworker, they still have a free version, and this is actually a pretty easy thing to do. Just go to SketchUp's website and click on Start Modeling. Oh, look at that, it's a ukulele man. Normally, I delete the human model, but for the sake of scale, it actually might not be a bad idea to leave them there, or put yourself in there. So to start, click the rectangle tool, and then click and drag it out to the size of your building. You could just type in the dimensions separated by a comma to make things more accurate. From this point, you don't really even need walls, but you can certainly sketch those in if it helps. Now, here's the cool part. Models for just about everything you might need to outfit the shop can be found in the 3D warehouse. Let's search for a table saw. Now, you might find all kinds of wacky stuff here, but just find something that is close and use it as a placeholder. Let's click Download Model, and look at that. We now have a table saw that we can move around the space. Just click the Move tool and scooch it around. Repeat this process for anything that you want to see in your new space. Anything you can't find, you could just represent as a box that matches the footprint. Just make a rectangle, click the Push-Pull tool, and click the face and pull it up to the appropriate height. Now triple click that box to highlight everything, and then right click and select Create Component. That kind of locks all the elements down, and you can now move it around like any of the other tools. So this solution costs nothing. It's fairly easy to do, just takes a little bit of practice and getting used to, and you could fully move every element of your shop around to your liking before committing to it in your actual build. Todd wrote in and said, I built Norm's router table several years ago and eventually installed a Jessam lift and replaced the top. But ultimately the overall table is not cutting it as my skill set and projects progress. I'm looking to upgrade and need a recommendation. I'm now in the buy once, cry once tool buying phase. Now that happens to be my favorite tool buying phase to be in. Now the good news with router tables is that if you go to like what we would call the top tier, you're probably going to be happy no matter what brand you go for. In fact, most companies that make router tables have really upped their game in the last, I would say, 5 to 10 years. So it's hard to go wrong, but there are a couple of details you want to pay attention to that might mean something to you. It's not necessarily good or bad, it just might be more useful to a particular user. Things like dust collection, micro adjustment, and total footprint size. Early on, I had a basic Jessam setup. It was solid and capable, but I wanted to delve into the world of micro adjustment. So I bit the bullet and bought a top-tier Incra setup. While the micro adjustment was definitely best in class, the fence system was huge and the footprint of the table was a little bit odd because it required a lot more depth than most router tables. So from there, I saw that Woodpeckers had come up with a nice setup featuring micro adjustment and a nice dust collection box. So I switched again. And this is the setup I currently have in my shop. It works great, but if I have a couple of complaints, it would be regarding the fence. It's a bit over-engineered with a lot of moving parts. It's also pretty big and bulky, and while the micro adjustment does work great, it extends so far back from the fence. If you want to make full use of the router table's depth, there's a good chance that the micro adjuster will just drop out of the grooves and become useless. So believe it or not, now I'm actually in the process of setting up a new Jessam router table. They've made a lot of changes since I last had one, and I'm anxious to try them out. Things like a height adjustment wheel, a dust box, a micro adjuster, and even their own 3¼ horsepower motor. Now I can't show you actual pictures yet because mine are still in the boxes, but stay tuned for more on this bad boy. So I can't give you a very specific recommendation, Greg, but hopefully this gives you a little bit of food for thought and just feel good about the fact that if you do put out the cash for a decent one, you're probably going to be happy with it. John wrote in and said, I need to make some 16th inch thick strips of maple for some work coming up. I don't have a drum sander. My bandsaw is tuned well enough to get 1/32 of an inch resaws, but the saw marks are definitely there. So what's the best method to remove all the saw marks in an efficient way? Get a drum sander, John. Buy once, cry once, baby. So one thing a lot of people might consider for thin strips would be the planer. Problem is, most planers aren't going to let you go down to a 16th of an inch. And even if they did, there's a real good chance that it would suck that piece up and just chew it to shreds. Now, one way you can get around that, and we often do for still even a little bit thicker material, is to use some kind of a sled, just a piece of scrap. It could be, MDF or, melamine or something like that, and you put the workpiece on top of that. This raises everything up a little bit and allows you to work within the capacity of the planer. But the problem is, at 16th of an inch, that is still very, very fragile. I really don't think I would trust that in a planer in most situations. So my recommendation is that you use the table saw instead. While we can't set the fence at a 16th of an inch and expect a safe cut, we can use a stop on the other side of the blade and set that space for a 16th of an inch. The only trouble with this method is that you have to keep resetting the fence and butting your workpiece up against the stop, which can lead to some variability in thickness. But with some practice, you can get pretty darn close. And of course, the advantage of the table saw is that the surfaces should be pretty clean after the cut. Fine Eye Woodworks wrote in and said, I've been slowly upgrading my equipment and now have to accept that 120 volts isn't going to cut it. As of today, I have a mix of receptacles and plugs for various tools. Do you have a variety of different receptacle types around the shop so that you can move things around? Do you rewire your equipment to try to get them on the same type plug so that you can have one receptacle type? My shop will only continue to evolve, so I want to wire the shop to be somewhat future-proof. Any advice on how to approach that would be helpful. As much as possible, I try to keep all of my plugs and receptacles consistent, but I tend to care a little bit more about the receptacle than the plug. Because two plugs may look different, but if the prong configuration is the same, they'll both work with the same receptacles. For my 120 volt circuits, I use standard NEMA 520R receptacles. Any tool with a 120 volt plug, whether rated for 15 amps or 20 amps, will fit in that receptacle. If your shop has 15 amp circuits, you need 5 15R receptacles instead. And if a tool has a 20 amp plug, it won't fit into a 15 amp receptacle by design. And please, please, please don't solve this problem by cutting off the 20 amp plug and installing a new 15 amp plug. At the very least, it's going to trip your breaker, and at the worst, it's going to cause a fire, so don't do it. Ideally, a shop space should have properly wired 20 amp circuits for high draw tools using 12 gauge wire and 20 amp breakers. I really lucked out with this shop. Since it was originally a firehouse, all 120 volt circuits are wired with 12 gauge, and there are no 15 amp circuits here at all. Now for 240 volts, there are two different receptacles that I use depending on the amperage of the circuit. For 20 amp circuits, I use 6 20R receptacles. Tools that come pre-wired with a 620p plug fit perfectly. If a tool doesn't include a plug, I usually install an industrial size 620p. They're easy to wire and very durable. For 30 amp circuits, I use L6 30R receptacles. Since all of my 30 amp runs are ceiling drops, I use the L6 30R female connectors instead of regular wall outlets. So the L in that code is for locking. You just give them a little bit of a twist and they kind of lock together, which I think is really important for something like a ceiling drop. Now, an extremely important thing to keep in mind with electrical work is that everything in the chain has to be rated appropriately. So let's just hypothetically say you have a peak draw on a tool of 16 amps. Well, you should probably have a 20 amp plug on there. That goes into a 20 amp receptacle. The circuit itself is run with 12 gauge wire all the way back to the circuit breaker, which should be a 20 amp breaker. If you do anything undersized in the chain, you do run the risk of having a fire, so don't do that. And just as a quick disclaimer, don't take any of my advice. I'm not an electrician and I don't want to be sued. Dennis wrote in and asked, do you have a favorite glue spreader, and does it change with the type of glue that you're using? I actually have two that I use in my shop, and unfortunately you're not going to find this type of thing by searching for glue roller or glue spreader. You have to look for the word brayer. The first is a standard 4-inch brayer. The handle is nice and comfortable, and the soft rubber head spreads any kind of glue that you want. The second is a 4-inch pop-in brayer. What's nice about this one is that you can pop out the roller for easy cleaning. Eventually though, the pop-in mechanism is going to loosen. Keep in mind that this particular roller is almost 15 years old, and it is a little bit loose, but it still works. And to answer your question specifically, Dennis, I use these rollers on any and every glue that I have in the shop. It's just important to clean them up afterwards. So that's going to do it for this edition of Ask TWW. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you want to have your questions featured on this show, all you got to do is join us in the YouTube members area or over on patreon.com/woodwhisper. So every week I put a post up and ask if anybody has questions. I will answer those questions each week, but I cherry pick some of them and bring them onto this show. Right, so it's a fun way to interact, get answers to your questions, and also we just started something new called Grain of Truth. It's a series of videos, I do about one a week, but they're short form videos of some behind the scenes stuff going on here in the shop, little tips, advice, maybe a little bit of philosophical things, just conversations, almost like a one-man podcast. I'm really enjoying doing them, and the feedback is really good too. People seem to like them. So it doesn't matter what level you sign up for, you get access to those videos and all the ones we've done so far. So hey, thank you so much for the support, everybody, and especially if you join us on Patreon or in the YouTube members area, your support really means a lot to me. Thanks so much. See you guys later. Excuse me. Well, that happens to be my favorite tool buying phrase. Phase, Todd, it's phase. Right. Welcome, my friends, to another Ask TWW, where you guys ask the questions and I do my best to answer them. Today's topics are your mom, why your mom likes me so much, why your mom doesn't like you.